All right, we're live. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My special guest is Klym from Kyiv, joining me live from Kyiv. How are you today?
Hi, William. Many thanks. I'm fine. A couple of attacks during last days on Kiev and on other cities of Ukraine, but we are fine, more or less fine. Thanks.
Great, great. I really have this special interest in Ukraine and everything that's going on there. As a business communications coach the last few years since COVID, I picked up a good number of clients in that part of the world. And I was there kind of in their offices and in their living rooms, right through the whole, right from the beginning. Even the weeks leading up to the war, there was a lot of anxiety building up to that. Some of you knew this was coming. Some of you didn't want to admit and didn't really think it was going to happen. And it happened. And then that was it. The days and weeks that followed was I was there witness to a lot of it. So it's deeply personal. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Uh, yeah, there are all the our conversations are always very fruitful and interesting, and thanks for this opportunity to share it with a broader audience. And but let me introduce myself, like say a couple of words about myself. Um, I'm a financial analyst, economist by my major. Worked for financial institutions here in Ukraine, and now work for international organization that helps to conduct reforms in Ukraine. My major actually is mathematics, but I also am PhD in economics. So now I'm here in Kyiv, living for 10 years already, I think. For about 10 years, yes. I've traveled a lot around the world. I've been to Europe, to US, where I worked actually as a lifeguard. I've been to Russia, to China, to Australia even. So I think I have something to share with you.
Nice, well traveled. Yeah, that's great. What was that American experience like really quickly? That was you were young?
very, very educational. It's
Yeah.
I was a student then at that time, and uh, you I was taught how to manage myself, take responsibility for your own life. You are going to another country with no connections, with no possibility to receive some help from your relatives, from your family, and just phone calls support in best way, in better way. And it's very educational because it's kind of different in US and in Europe, in Ukraine especially.
That is quite far from home, right? That's quite a student experience that you had there. So, but countries are very similar in a lot of ways, right?
Yes and no. Yes and no. There are a lot of different small things that are very different in US. It's now recalls me the scene from Fiction when these characters they are discussing France and their experience in France, and now they call cheeseburger like royal cheese or something. And so there are some small differences in usual things in US and in Ukraine. Kitchen is very different, transportation, all these roads, for example. But there are a lot of similarities. What I like about US is that people are very dedicated to what they do, to their jobs. They concentrate on this uh, much more than in many European countries, actually. And this is a little bit how it is in Ukraine also, because people in Ukraine also are very dedicated to their work positions, to their job.
And in the work that you do, what is it that you do now at this? What can you talk about?
Well,
More economics.
yeah, I analyze the state of events here in Ukrainian economy and investigate the lacunes in laws, trying to understand how it all works and describe it to my supervisors.
You were one of the four or five, six Ukrainian clients at the time who did know, you kind of knew that this was going to happen with the war in the days, weeks leading up to it. You were, in some ways, you were preparing, right? In what ways did you um, prepare for this?
Yeah, actually, to be honest, from mathematical point of view, I was hoping that it won't happen because Russia accumulated very small forces for invasion compared to our country and to their targets. But they had a different plan, and this like missionary thinking, and they were they were thinking to invade with these smaller forces. Knowing Russian character, I was trying to prepare at least, even though I was hoping it won't happen. I was trying to prepare. First, I got contacts with people who I trained a little bit with weaponry and survivorship, such kind of stuff. And I've got some stocks of food, cash, water, whatever you might be need in case of war. Actually, I've got additional fuel for my car, for example, which was very helpful during the first days of invasion. I told all my members of my family, my parents, to do the same. I was actually trying to persuade them to evacuate before the invasion, either to western part of the country or abroad, but they didn't want to do it. So, but anyway, it was a total shock for me when it happened.
It was still a shock when it actually happened, huh?
Yeah, yeah. I vividly remember this day. Uh, to be honest, when I was going to bed, I was already. I knew the information that they started the operation, but then I woke up somewhere in early morning because of explosions behind the window. I was in Kyiv, and they started to attack some military bases, infrastructure, and so on. And I was just sitting on the bed for a couple of hours, checking the news, seeing how this. You remember these convoys of Russian military vehicles are breaking through the border and coming inside the country, moving to the capital. And yeah, it was very, very scary. Probably the scariest experience that I had. But then some of my friends called me, wrote to me, and messaged me, and they said that, guys, it has begun. We have job to do, and we started working for the following couple of weeks. I worked on the fortification system for Kyiv. Most of the people tried to flee the capital, and it was the exposition was terrifying. It was like in this movie Independence Day with Will Smith. Remember when people
Yeah.
are trying to flee large cities, and it
Roads
was
are clogged up and people
yeah,
running out of
roads in
gas
one
on the
direction,
road.
in western direction they were clogged,
Wow.
and this traffic jam it lasted like for a couple of days. It didn't stop at all. But in other directions, it was more or less empty, and you can. And I was using these roads to coordinate, to work with other people on the fortification systems.
And that the fortification you mean is like protecting the city, essentially.
Yeah, unfortunately, there were not much preparations before the invasion because nobody believed that it will happen, especially from the politician side. Militaries were preparing somehow. That's why the first strike didn't cause so much damage for them, but they didn't switch to military mode, to war mode before the invasion, and that's why they were quite limited in building fortifications, in mobilizing people, and so on. And yeah, they caught us Russians caught us just in the middle of usual life, middle of usual activities, and very soon, during the first day, they were already in the outskirts of Kyiv, and we had to protect at least the capital from the invasion. What I was thinking then at that time, if we fight for the capital, just for at least for some time, maybe they will leave us in western towns, in western cities. Maybe it won't get further to the west. Maybe we will have some place to hide later. But it appeared much more positive for us. We stand our ground here in Kyiv. They retreated, and now we are mostly fighting in eastern part of Ukraine.
Why do you think this all happened? Why is the Russian president Putin doing this?
This is a very interesting and like a key question to all this. Russian propaganda actually creates numerous reasons for this, but I will get to this later if you'd like. I think that the true reason for this is that Russians have stuck somewhere by their mindset somewhere in 19th century. They still think of the world in terms of empires conquering other nations' territories, trying to dominate other nations instead of collaborating with them or trade with them or so on. They think that their greatness lies in in more territories that they control, more nations that they dominate, and many nations, especially European nations, they passed through such periods when they were driven by these imperialistic ambitious. But they already passed it. Now people in Europe are more interested in trading, in professional realization, in science, in travel, and so on. They don't want to go into war. But with Russians, it's somehow different. It's hard to say. First, they after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they were very depressed, and then the market conditions changed, and they earned a lot of money on selling oil and gas for Europe to European countries and all over the world. And they thought that they didn't direct this money into development of their territories, into the development of their sciences, schools, medical area sectors, or something else. They thought that conquering other nations and building a more powerful army is more relevant. This is something that drives them now. It's hard to say what is more here, Putin's ambitions or intentions of Russian people. Probably they combine each other. They complement each other.
It's just such a shame because it seems like they were heading in the right direction for a little bit. And as an American, I grew up in the Cold War in the 80s. We were still feeling that tension, and kids were still sent in. We had what they call these air raid drills, and we were sent out into the hall in school, and we had to get down in the hallway, and in case there was a nuclear attack from, and it was from, it was all based on that Cold War between the U.S. and USSR, and that went on for decades like that, and I grew up with that, and then it all just came to an end in '89, and they stopped doing that, and then, if you look to fast forward to the 2000s, it looked like, Russia was getting along with people and things were going to be all right, and they made a lot more money, and doesn't seem like a good business move now for them to do this and cut
Yeah,
themselves off
definitely.
from the rest of the world, really.
That's actually what most of people thought, that Russia somewhere changed to democracy, to more uh, to a more to a free became a free country at some point. But actually, it happened just for a very short period of time, and the economic conditions were very bad at the time. So when Putin came into power, he started again to play with these imperialistic motivations, and he was also driven by this oil incomes, and in combination, they grew up to such a awful end, I would say, because Russian regime now, what is Russia now? It is very close to what happened to Germany in before the Second World War. It is something very close to it. Russian chauvinism multiplied by the desire to avenge the whole world for their fall, for the collapse of Soviet Union.
Well, because he's somebody who grew up in that. He started his career in that time period, right? So now that he's 70 something years old.
Yeah. This actually drives him a lot. He got a lot of power. He's actually, you can say that he's a tyrann. There is no opposition there in Russia to him.
Mhm.
He
He
recently
just won
killed.
re-election, so but the
He's gonna win
election
the
was a
election. Yeah.
sham.
Now he's thinking about himself as a missionary, something who need to do something very historical, important, and he sees this in expanding Russian Empire, at least to the territories which someday belong to Russia. And that's why actually it is not only about Ukraine, because Ukraine was part of Russian Empire at for some centuries, but also Baltic countries were part of Russian Empire. Part of modern Poland was also in Russian Empire, and so if he ends up with Ukraine, somehow conquers Ukraine, there is no limits for his ambitions. He would like to go further
There are
to
many
restore.
easier, smaller countries, right? I mean, that he could pick. What are there, like 20 something countries that were part of the USSR at some point?
Yeah, but most of them are in some relation, in some dependence from Russia. Yeah, that's true, except maybe for Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, and these Baltic countries. Baltic countries were part of USSR also, but they're happy to be part of NATO now. Now, but
Yes, yeah.
anyway, if Russia at somehow decided they are powerful enough to combat NATO, then other countries will have to step in to protect their allies. And they are quite vulnerable there near Russian border with very limited military resources. And actually, Russia can even say can even challenge US, because Alaska was also someday part of Russia, and they from time to time they recall this. They say that yeah, Alaska will be returned to Russian dominance.
The Bering
They don't
Strait
do it
there, yeah. So.
yet. They haven't done it yet, just because they think that they are weaker than US. They are relatively rational from this perspective, and they try to fight to oppose those who seem to be weak. We seemed weak before the invasion for them, as an easy target, easy catch. So they decided to invade us. But now, as the war goes on, they switched to military rails. They switched economy to military rails, and they are becoming more and more powerful from this perspective. And I'm afraid that at some point they can try to challenge NATO also. Why not? It was it can be seemed irrational for you, but it was also irrational to take Crimea. It was also irrational to take Donbass. It was also irrational to invade Ukraine, because they had a lot of powers here. They had a lot of business here in Ukraine, and they didn't have the need to conquer it by military forces.
This invasion has been in the works. I mean, going back to 2014, there was that initial invasion and the
Yeah,
taking of that
they
land.
started they started they started the war in 2014 with the annexation of the Crimea. And actually, at that time, Ukraine started not to escalate. Ukraine tried not to escalate. It was following orders by Western leaders, which say, just stay calm, something, we will solve it politically, something goes wrong. And there were no military opposition to Russian invasion at that moment. But what Russians did next? As soon as they got Crimea, they thought that they can get another bigger piece, and then they invaded with their agents, with their troops, special troops, in Donbass region, which is also close to Russian border. At that point, Ukrainians already started to resist, to oppose them, and managed to stop the conflict for at least 5 years on a very limited territory, which unfortunately left under Russian occupation for all this period. And but what next? Russian just rearranged and tried to strike exactly into the capital already, to take the whole Ukraine. So it's not about some border conflict or some issues with Ukraine that can be solved because due to negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. It's for us, it's existential conflict. Russia wants to integrate us fully, to conquer us, to erase Ukrainian identity, definitely. And this is also about confrontation between authoritarian regimes and democracies. For Putin, it's one of the way to keep his power, to stay in power. He decided not to develop the country in some economy or in science or in something else. He channeled the energy of people, of Russians, to outside enemies, virtual or real, though there were no real enemies to Russia who would invade Russia. It's crazy.
He has portrayed this as
So
a defense, right? In a lot of his propaganda, he's defending Russia by doing this. It's a
yeah, this
weird
is one of
reversal
the way
there.
to just justify the expansion. But I think the main reason for invasion is this policy of expansion. You just need to expand, and this is what authoritarian regimes often do. It's Russians not the first one in this. They just channel the energy of people on the some enemies abroad. And in the Russian case, it was highly supported by Russian people, unfortunately. They don't oppose it. Sometimes they say that it's Putin's war, but about 1 million of Russians are without any confrontation, without any opposition. They are going to Ukraine to kill people here, to loot stuff, to torture people, to earn money because salaries are good in Russian military, in Russian army. And he's supported inside of Russia, even by those people who are not in the army. I would estimate that at least 30% of people highly support this war, and about 30% are somewhere in between, supporting or not supporting. But
anyone who protested this early on disappeared virtually. They were arrested in the streets and
yeah, that's true. Putin suppressed all the opposition, all free media, and now the laws are becoming more and more strict on this. And sometimes people got arrested just for writing a word "war" on the fence.
just you can't even use that word. Right?
Yeah, you cannot even say that this is war because they call it special operation. And if there is, they invented such law that if you say something like how do we call it? If you say something badly about Russian army, then you can be fined or even imprisoned. And now if you say that Russian army conducting crimes, then you definitely will be imprisoned there in Russia. So he can do everything he wants. So if there is, even if there is some people there who are against Russia, I would estimate it about 20-30%. They are very afraid of doing something, and unfortunately, they are not used to do something. Soviet regime were very suppressive to people, and Soviet people with Russians and this continues for Russians. They are afraid to take responsibility for their lives and for their freedom, for their government, and so on. They just obey Putin's orders, I would say.
What about the propaganda? Like you actually mentioned Germany, and World War II, and how is Putin using propaganda now to convince that 30% and make the case to the world? Most of the world knows the truth, but it hasn't stopped him from trying to make these things up. We saw the interview not that long ago, a few weeks back, with Tucker Carlson, and so more propaganda perpetuated there. What are some of the big things? How do we answer some of those big points that he says? He says that he's defending Russia. He's trying to shut down Nazis in Ukraine.
Well, actually, in interview to Carlson, Putin opened up. I think he tried to justify the invasion because of these historical reasons that Ukraine always was part of Russia and there is no Ukrainians at all. These are like spoiled Russians and so on. So I think that what I'm telling about the real reasons for Putin. For Putin, it's part of his mission in this world to restore Russian Empire. But actually, regarding propaganda, it is much more sophisticated. I think that Russian propaganda, is one of the most powerful weapons that they have now, because with this they convert people to this like there is like brain worms sometimes in cartoons where people start not to adequately react to reality. And this actually how it's sometimes I think that people under Russian propaganda, they wore this brain worms because they may seem normal in usual activities, in usual life, but as soon as it starts talking about war or Russian policy or anything, they are going crazy. They are just starting to repeat what they heard in the television without any argumentation or any other thought or anything. And what is very distinguishable for Russian propaganda? First, it is overall. Russian state owns most of the media, either directly or via state corporates or anything. They destroyed all free media long time ago, and so and they go not only by TV, they also go in internet, in newspapers, and so on and so on. So anybody who was more or less famous and was opposing Russian policy, they are imprisoned or killed many years ago, dozen years ago. So now there is no alternative for people there in Russia to understand that there could be other reality. Also, usually Russians are not very good in other languages. They know only Russian, and it's hard for them to read in English or Ukrainian or some in other languages. And Russian language now is totally controlled. Russian language media is in total control in Russia of the state. This is one distinguishable feature of Russian propaganda. Totality, I would say. Another one is that they try to target different groups, like Facebook is targeting people via different people with different advertisements. So they create all kinds of stories for different groups. For example, they have numerous justifications regarding invasion of Ukraine. At some points, they say that they need that we were going to attack Russia. That's why they had to step in first to defend themselves. In other points, they say that they have to protect Russian speakers in Ukraine, but probably nobody killed as much Russian speakers in Ukraine as Putin's army. Nobody caused more harm to them. There were even official statements that Ukrainian breed some infected birds and send them to Russia to infect their people.
Wow, that's pretty
so
creative.
They create all levels, all kind of stories, so that people can choose any depending on their own level of understanding of their interests and so on. But the most popular definitely is that Ukrainians don't exist. It's like spoiled Russians. We should just integrate them. And sometimes it is mixed with that there is a Nazi government here in Ukraine, and they should conquer this government and free all the people in Ukraine. Which is
the oppressed Ukrainians, right?
Yeah.
Well, you've been an independent country for a long time now, right? It's been, what has it been, over 30 years?
From
But even
90s,
before that, even before USSR and all of that, there's an old history that goes way back, right?
Definitely, yeah. And actually,
and you have your own language as well. It's a separate language.
Yeah,
so, I mean,
it's a very large topic to discuss in one hour regarding Ukrainian history. But definitely, yeah. Unfortunately, we stuck in Russian Empire for a couple of centuries, for at least 300 years, I think. But before this, we were definitely a separate state. Sometimes we were allies with Poland and Lithuania, like part of these unions with these countries. We have a totally different history and totally different approaches to many things. not mentioning the language, which Putin somehow they actually sometimes they call Ukrainian invented by Austrian general staff as a
Wow.
part of war with Russian Empire, which is very funny because the first book actually written in Ukrainian language, printed in Ukrainian language. It seems to me it is dedicated. It is attributed to 17th century, if I'm not mistaken. But the language was much more before this, and you can track the language from Kyiv and Rus from thousands of years ago. Russian also you can track from this period, but it was developed in a little bit different direction, more influenced by Eastern cultures and so on. To be honest, I would not prefer not to go too deep in this history because, yeah, Putin justifies his war with history, but his knowledge of history is ridiculous. He
It's
just
distorted and fabricated.
totally, yeah, he's very poor. His reference to Nazi government is quite funny. Even Carson said that it is the dumbest thing he heard in his life.
And a lot of historians went through that interview and refuted all of those things. So, I mean, we don't need to do that. So,
but regarding this Nazi, it's quite interesting. It's just that Russians, they call Nazi everybody who they don't like. Everybody who is not
So
liked by them, they
anyone,
call Nazi. So you can be Nazi, for
I'm the
example.
Nazi. Yeah, anyone's a
The Nazi.
Nazi if you
If
don't
you
agree.
if you do something in resistance, if you oppose Russian policy, then you're
Disagree.
Nazi.
That's it. Yeah.
They
You're the
call
enemy.
they call this many countries in Europe, many politicians in Europe, as soon as they oppose Russian policy, they like blame it. It's a way to dehumanize the enemy, and it's easier for themselves to justify why they're killing Ukrainians. Actually,
Yeah. There are people here
sometimes they
that do that too. I mean, it's a terrible thing
take out
oh,
some people who are interested in Nazi culture, and they say that, oh, you see, there is a Nazi in Ukraine. You can see him on the screen, but come on, there are some weird guys in every culture, in every country, and
sure.
actually Nazi groups are much more developed in Russia than
Neo-Nazi hate
myself.
groups, and yeah,
Yeah,
that's
but there's this kind of groups. They never influenced Ukrainian policy. Even national parties, which a little bit far right, they've got like 3% in the parliament. In other cases, they was never even presented in the parliament. That's why it's very ridiculous. And it's partly related to World War II and I would say new religion that is developing there in Russia. This admiration of their victory in World War II. This is like a new religion to Russians. It's actually very funny. I can talk hours about this probably. I will just mention a couple of points. First, this Victory Day, it's like a carnival for them. It's like a Brazilian carnival for them. It's a lot of people are got involved. Definitely, there is a huge parade on the Red Square.
and when is that? What month is that?
9th of May.
Okay, so that's coming up. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Wow.
every day, every year, it's bigger and bigger and more,
Okay.
more. I don't know how is the word, but more fun for them. So there is a parade. A lot of military units, coming through the Red Square. Airplanes coming over the Red Square. Then troops marching behind Putin, behind us. They usually take a lot of veterans and place them around Putin to show how he's very careful, how he care about old generation, so on. Somehow they had to represent the veterans of World War II, but to be honest, World War II ended like more than 75 years ago, and most of those veterans are already dead, but somehow they managed to find 60-year-old veterans and place them everywhere and say, yeah, these are veterans of World War II. But not only 9th of May, they celebrate some other events which happened during this war, like liberation of some town or breakthrough through some front line or anything. So these are scattered all over the year. They have like little small museums in every school where they place this stuff from World War II and show how their grandfathers, their parents were, how
So
their
very, very
grandfathers.
highly patriotic for their.
Yeah, and actually now they took some stuff from Ukraine and put in these museums to show how they combine these two wars somehow. And what is the worst, probably most scary, is that during 9th of May, they lately they started to drag portraits of their ancestors on sticks and walk around with them. Sometimes these are their grandfathers who were in the war. Sometimes these are like some random people and they just drag them around. It's scary and ridiculous from many points. And they actually built a huge cathedral somewhere on the memorial field, which is red, black, blue, which reminds more of a naval castle than a cathedral. And they melted some weapons, Nazi weapons, and put it in the stairs of this cathedral just to show how they can dominate, how they can win wars. Now they somehow justify their invasion into Ukraine by their victory 75 years ago. It's very hard to combine these two things, but Russian propaganda managed to do it. And yeah, they unfortunately really like spoil people's brainwashes people's minds. I have a bit of had some relatives, distant relatives there in Russia, but they don't listen to me. What is going on here? They just repeat what is on the TV set, what they can read or see in the TV set, and this is more than enough for them.
Yeah, I mean, I have clients from. I have some clients from Russia. I call them my former Russians. They're not in Russia anymore, so they're in different countries around Europe. And then it's just been amazing to see how they handled it and not being there anymore and knowing they can't go back home ever again, really. They don't want to go home. They don't agree with this. And then also, seeing how different all of you have handled it. All of the people that I've interacted with all have a kind of a different, a different but similar experience going through this. Some of them even have relatives in Russia, like you were saying, also even closer relatives. We're talking like mother-in-law type of really divisions that have been caused by this, where they're not talking to these people anymore. But I love to really dig deeper into the personal effects on you and all of those things and have you back another time to do that, because there's so much to talk about here and we're out of time now, but let's do this again sometime soon because there's so much more to get into. What do you think
Oh,
about that?
the time actually passed so fast. I didn't
Yeah, it
even
did. It went really quick.
recognize it. Yeah, okay then.
So let's have you back on and
Yeah, let's continue some next time.
we'll continue that and really get back a little deeper into the personal effects and where we see this going in the future. So,
Yeah, definitely.
all right. Well, we'll see
Thanks,
you again
thanks
soon
for
then.
your
Thanks so much for joining us, Clem.